Good afternoon, Pastor.
Good afternoon, my dear brother.
All right, so our first question today. Pastor, can you tell us a little bit about your journey into ministry and how God first called you?
Hello, my name is Benjamin Moore, and a little bit about myself and my journey into ministry. I'm a political scientist by training, and I teach outside of the ministry. I'm a family man. I got saved on the 3rd of June, 1993. That's when my journey with the Lord began. On a cold evening in the small city of Buea in the southwest region of Cameroon, in a place called Sefam, where a crusade was organized by the Cameroon's Youth for Jesus. And that night, a certain gentleman who would later on become a father, a mentor, a great coach, in the person of Professor Julius Asunge, a mathematician by training, was preaching that night. And his sermon pierced through my heart, and the emptiness of my life was revealed, and the need for me to surrender to Jesus Christ immediately, which I did. And that's when my journey began. I grew in faith and would later on become a leader with the youth movement during my campus days in the University of Buea, and organized a lot of crusades across the nation, crisscrossing the nation of Cameroon. And ministry would also take me to other parts of Africa and even to Europe, where in the guise of going for further studies, Europe was a mission ground. And we did a lot of work and continue to still do some in nations like Belgium, Italy, where we organized the summer gospel outreaches. In Germany, we've done a lot of work in Germany. In Italy, across many cities in Italy, in Sicily, in Naples, in Rome, in Orte, in Ladispolis, in Pisa, and a host of others. In the Netherlands as well, in Spain, and across North America, we've done a lot of things. In Canada, in the US, in Mexico, in New Mexico, and of course in Asia, we go to India, we go to other nations around to share the wonderful hope that is in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I am based in Canada, where I'm the lead pastor, one of the leaders of the New Life International Gospel Center, also known as the Hope for All Nations Church, located in Ottawa, the capital city of Canada. We have branches in Cameroon and in a few other nations. And we are delighted to see what the Lord is doing through broken vessels like ourselves. And we can only look forward to the much more that He has as He prepares the earth for this great end time harvest. So that's a little bit about myself and what God is doing through us. The moment that shaped my obedience and my faith in my walk with the Lord, when I look back, I would say that the defining moment was the night when I got saved. I am from a broken home. That night, a cold evening, my mom had separated with my dad, and I was more or less a child of the street. When I embraced Jesus Christ, that marked the turning point in my life, because I had a revelation of God, not just as a father, but I also had a revelation of Him as a mother, as one who cares, who provides, who protects. And He spoke to me that if I will put my trust in Him, my confidence in Him, He will take me to the ends of the earth and lift my head high. It's something that I chose to do. And I have seen those promises come to life. On one particular occasion, I have been invited to speak at a conference in Europe. It was a pastors and church leaders conference. And usually before I go for such a conference, I will spend time seeking God and crying out to Him to give me a message. I sought the face of the Lord for many days and did not have a message. When I went for the conference, I was lodged in a hotel, and the conference hall was at the lower floor of the hotel. I was upstairs and the conference was holding down. I was restless because right up until then, I had not had a message. And that night I cried before the Lord. I felt like He had brought me all the way and not given me a message, and that I was getting ready to be disappointed or to make a fool of myself, for lack of a better word. When it was time for me to go up and speak, the protocol came, took me, ushered me to the stage. And I was on the stage, knelt down and began crying. Most of the participants thought that I was crying because of the presence of God, which was palpable, you could feel it. But I was crying because I didn't know what to say. And when I knelt down and was crying and said, Lord, help me, the Lord spoke to me through His Spirit. He said, tell them your story. That was one of my first international trips. He said, tell them your story. I opened my mouth and told them how about 10 years ago, the Lord had spoken to me when I gave my life to Him, that if I would obey Him and put my confidence in Him, He would take me across the globe to proclaim His name. He said, tonight is a story of faithfulness of God. Tonight is a night of promises that have been accomplished. Tonight is a night of faith. I want you to share your story with them of how faithful I am and how my promises don't fail. When I opened my mouth and explained to them how far the Lord had brought me, from a street child who grew up in a broken home, who had no one to look up to, when I began sharing that with them, I didn't know that it was a prophetic word for somebody. For there were many in that hall who had great promises over their lives. But it seemed as if it was being delayed. When I began talking to them, you could hear a pin drop in the hall. There was no dry eye. Everyone began crying. Then I understood that sometimes God would allow certain things to happen because of the big picture He has in mind. It changed my life forever, because since then I knew that all things would work together for the good of those who love God and who are called according to His purpose. It has shaped my obedience. It has shaped my trust in God, but above all, it has shaped my faith. I have learned to trust Him even more. I have learned to depend on Him even more. And I have learned to be calm even when I don't know what is happening. My walk with God has evolved over the years drastically, because I have come to realize that there are at least 4 stages in every believer's walk with God. We start off as children, and then we mature into sons. And as children, we are weak. We are complainers. We do all kinds of things that children do, in the way we talk, in the way we understand, in the way we reason, like Paul said. And then we move to a stage of sons, which allows us access into God's agenda. And that access into God's agenda, it's something that is orchestrated by our understanding of responsibility. It's in sonship that we step into our inheritance. Paul, writing to the Galatians, will say to them that a child, even though he is the heir, is not different from a slave. But when he becomes a son, he steps into his inheritance. You will never ever be able to get all what is yours if you remain a child. So when we get born again, when I got born again, I was a child, completely dependent on God. But as I began growing, I understood the necessity of becoming a son. And in my understanding, a son has to do with responsibility. Isaiah said, unto us a child is given, unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders. Sons are the ones who are able to carry the weight of the kingdom. And there is a dimension of authority, of grace, that God begins to bequeath to those who have become sons. So my journey moved from a child to becoming a son. But there is even something higher, which has to do with priesthood. And priesthood is what allows us to be able to represent God, to do his biddings. Priesthood is what allows us to live lives of consecration, lives of submission, lives of dedication, lives of obedience to God. And it is in the practice of our priesthood that we begin to reign. So my journey, my evolution with God has been from that state of childhood to becoming a son. But now I'm not just seeking to be a son. I understand my identity as a priest, and my kingship is in my priesthood. Because the more I live a life of consecration, the more the kingdom authority is being released over my life. And not just for me. I believe God's desire, as he has said severally in the book of Revelations, something that Peter echoed in his days, that God has made us a kingdom of priests and kings, a royal priesthood. So our royalty is first of all in our priesthood. I realized this, that many believers, including myself back then, I wanted to be royalty, but did not understand that the royalty of the believer was tied to the practice of priesthood. So my evolution now is that I understand that my true power, my true authority, my true royalty is premised on my practice of priesthood. And so I understand that I'm a priest. I'm God's priest. And I'm trying and striving to live as a priest every day. So that has been my evolution. True kingdom leadership, in my opinion, is defined and characterized by one word or one phrase: serving. True leadership is leadership that is geared towards serving the people. The blueprint of leadership that our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ practiced while he was on earth and prescribed through the pages of Scripture for everyone aspiring to be a leader is that every true leader, every kingdom leader must be one who serves. And you cannot be an effective leader in the sight of God, a good leader in the sight of God, if you don't understand that leadership is not to reign over people. Leadership is actually to serve people. So in my opinion, true kingdom leadership is leadership that is geared towards serving, what is often referred to as servant leadership. Jesus put it this way: he says, he that seeks to be the greatest among you shall be the servant of all. When he rose from the dead following his encounter with Peter, who had been declared to be the head of the church, the leader of the church, he asked him a question, and therein lies his own understanding, or our understanding of leadership. Peter, do you love me? When Peter said yes, he said, feed my sheep. The purpose of leadership is to serve those God has called us to lead. So that's what I understand about kingdom leadership. That's what I'm aspiring for. That's what I'm practicing. I think that one of the greatest challenges that most leaders face today, especially within the context of ministry, I would say is twofold. Number one is an attempt or a struggle of communicating, number one, and number two, making people see what you have seen or understand what God has impressed upon your heart. You will be a frustrated leader If the people God has called you to serve do not see what you see or do not understand what God has called you to do. And that is why Moses had a lot of problems. A lot of problems. Because when the people don't see, they don't have a reference. And so there will be a tendency for them wanting to either be where they are or go back to where they used to be. That is why on several occasions, they said to Moses, let us go back to Egypt. But there were 2 people there out of the 12 who had gone to spy the promised land and who would eventually enter. Their mindset was different. Because Moses saw the promised land before he died. Joshua and Caleb saw the promised land before he died. And an entire generation that left Egypt who did not see perished in the wilderness until a new generation arose. The first challenge of leadership is when people don't understand where you're going to. And number 2, when they don't even see it. And so the challenge of leadership for every leader, number 1, is to, as much as you can, ensure that the people you're leading have a thorough understanding of what God has called you to do, where you're going to. The Bible says, write down the vision, make it plain, so that whosoever reads it should be able to run with it. Speed comes when people understand where you're headed to and what God has called you to do. That's number 1. Number 2, the second challenge that every leader faces, I would say in my case, is when they don't quite understand that it is God's work. I would explain. Many people tend to be very frustrated when they are leaders and then they don't see the transformation happen or the growth happen or the increase happening as fast as they would have desired. I have come to terms with this. I am just an instrument in the hands of God, and that it is God's responsibility to transform people. I have one responsibility: to plant. I may not even be the one to water, it may be Apollos. But one thing is guaranteed: God will give the increase. I am not God. So the increase that is meant to happen is God's responsibility. So as a leader, I have learned to do what God has called me to do, to be faithful in it, and to allow God do His. When you don't understand this, you want to switch roles with God. And because you don't understand His timing, you don't understand His system, you don't understand His ways, you don't even know His why, you may end up being very frustrated. So the second challenge for that leaders face is that sometimes we want things to happen the way we want them to happen. We are not God. Let us be faithful in what God has called us to do, and let us allow God to take responsibility for what is His to do. How do I raise leaders who are faithful, humble, and effective? I think that there is just one solution to raising such, and that would be by pointing them to Jesus. The only guarantee that you will succeed in raising leaders who are faithful, who are humble, who are effective, is when you point them to Jesus. Jesus is the blueprint of effective leadership, and anything outside Him would be an aberration of the biblical prescription of leadership. Anything outside Jesus would be artificial. If you point them to you, they would be like you. But if you want to point them to you, make sure that you too are following Jesus. Because Paul said to Timothy, follow me as I follow Christ. And we know that Paul had one thing that defined him. It was incurable humility. Incurable humility. And that's why he was such an amazing leader. He writes 2/3 of the New Testament. His shadow raises the dead. His name is known not only among mortals, but in the depths of hell. Demons say we know Paul. But he says that I am not even worthy to be called an apostle because of my past. He had the ability to say anything, but he chose the way of humility. To raise leaders who are humble, who are faithful, you can only point them to one person, Jesus Christ. If they see Jesus, if they learn Jesus, if they follow Jesus, they will be like him. What mistakes do I often see young ministers make, and how can they avoid them? I would say that the context is also different, because they could make financial mistakes, make spiritual mistakes, make any kind of mistake. But I believe that there is one prescription that could be a one-size-fits-all. As a young minister, being one myself, the mistake that I made in the past, and that I see many make today, is a departure from the one who raised them. By this, I'm not talking about other human beings. I'm talking about the Lord Jesus Christ. You see, in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse number 18, Moses is talking to a new group of people who are on the urge of a harvest, a major harvest of their lives. They are at a transitional phase. So he issues a warning. He's not issuing that warning to slaves, because they are not slaves anymore. They've left Egypt. He's not issuing that warning to confused people, because their wandering in the wilderness has ended. When Moses tells them, you shall remember the Lord your God, he's talking to a group of people that are on the verge of entering their possession, of harvesting what God promised them, because they're at a transitional phase. You see, they're about to move from tents to houses, because in the wilderness, they lived in tents. Now they are getting into Canaan land, the promised land, where they are about to get houses they did not build, where they are about to get vines they did not plant. So they've gone through their time of struggle, and God, who sees ahead, issues a warning. Do you know why? Because sometimes the blessings of the Lord upon the life of the believer would cause what is called spiritual amnesia. Amnesia is a disease that will make you forget. And so God warns them. He warns them. He says, you shall remember the Lord your God, for he is the one who gave you power to make wealth. That word power is that you must remember him, for he is your source. They were going through a transition from sleeping in tents to sleeping in houses. They're going through a transition from being fed by manna to growing their own food. They were going through a transition where miracles will be replaced by skill. And what do I mean? In the wilderness, God had to send manna. In Canaan, they have to grow their food. So it's a dangerous thing, because miracles very often are product of our dependence on God. And skill is our own ability. And people tend to forget God when they think that this was accomplished by my own skill. And that is what Israel was about to face. From tents to homes, from miracles to skill, from manna to their own food, whatever they wanted. They had variety. Moses says, please be careful. The mistake many young ministers make is that they forget where they come from. When God begins to bless, they no longer see the necessity for prayers. They don't see the necessity for consecration. They don't see the necessity for humility. They don't see the necessity for sanctification. It's because there is a tendency that the blessings of God will make you get into a state of spiritual amnesia where you forget. And God considers forgetfulness as a sin. He calls it unrighteousness. So he puts it this way. He says, God is not unrighteous to forget. When men forget, they're unrighteous. Don't make the mistake of forgetting who called you, or forgetting who blessed you, or forgetting who empowers you, or forgetting who helped you. The mistake I made, the mistake I see others make, is that they often tend to forget. So I pray that as you watch, as you listen, you would remember the Lord your God and all he has done for you. Because in remembering, you acknowledge him. And in acknowledging him, you posture yourself even for more. I believe that missions and humanitarian outreaches should not just be something that is specific to me, idiosyncratic to my calling. I believe that it is the call of every genuine believer. Jesus said something in Matthew chapter 5, his classic Sermon on the Mount, which spans through 5, 6, and 7. He says, you are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth. In other words, the effect of ministry, the impact of ministry is not supposed to be localized within the walls of the church. The value of what we do for the kingdom is measured not inside the church, but outside the church. The church is meant to be a training ground where people are equipped so that they can take the gospel out there and advance the borders and the frontiers of God's kingdom. The nature of the ministry God called us into, called me into, is holistic in its approach. So we are not just concerned about the well-being of the spiritual man. We are concerned about the well-being of the total man. John said, I wish that you may prosper and be in good health, even as your soul prospers. So the prosperity is not just limited to that of the spirit. We also want to come into communities. That's why one of our phrases as a ministry is to restore hope, to change lives, and to transform communities. And so whereas the gospel that we preach is at the center of it, one of the channels we use is the love of God. And sometimes the love of God speaks louder than the words that are echoed from our pulpits. I would share a short story with you. I was in India 2 years ago, and I was taken to a place called a leprosy camp. In India, when you have leprosy, you're taken very far away from the village, from where life functions as normal. And you are literally abandoned because the people there are not allowed to be touched, because for them, they still have the mindset that leprosy is probably contagious. When I went to India after I had finished preaching this crusade, I felt like I needed to take food and go and see these people. So the people that were driving me around took me, and we drove for about 2 hours, 2.5 hours. From where I was, in a place called Salem, where St. Thomas the Apostle's cathedral is, that's where he died. When I went to this leprosy camp, I met people who had not showered for years. I met people whose toes had been chopped off by leprosy, who didn't have fingers, who didn't have food. When I saw them, my heart melted. And I felt like beyond giving them the food I had brought, they needed much more. Some needed a hug. Some needed a shower. Some needed their wounds to be cleaned and bandaged. And all of a sudden, I felt like this is why the Lord wanted me to come. I engaged them. Some were given showers. Some had their hair cut. Some had their wounds cleaned. Because Jesus said, I was in prison, you visited me not. So outreaches will be part of the curriculum that he would use to judge the world. He said, I was hungry and you did not give me food. I was thirsty and you did not give me water to drink. Say, I was naked and you did not clothe me. So outreaches would actually be a segment that God will draw from when he's judging the believer, beyond what we preached, beyond what we are preaching, beyond what we will preach. Another instance, I was in the city of Boya, and we saw a man, and the Lord spoke to us by prophecy that this man is destined to be a very great man. But the man had been insane for about 14, 15 years, had left their home and was moving in the streets almost naked. When we saw him, I had just finished preaching a crusade. And I said to the boys that were serving with me, go catch him. Because the Lord said you have to cut off his hair, give him a shower and pray for him. They caught him, gave him some food. When he became calm, I took him with some brothers and we started cutting his hair. We started scrubbing off his body. He had not bathed, I don't know for how many years. The stench that came out of his body was scary, and it remained in that atmosphere for several weeks. When we gave him a shower, cleaned him, gave him new outfits, prayed for him, I would later on hear that his life was completely restored. He became a man that began serving and blessing many others. This is a life that is worth much more than the weight of the world. And if that is all what God sent us to do, I would still do it again anytime, any day. Because I believe that every believer is not just called to preach, it is also called to showcase Christ, to reveal him and make him known. And we make him known through the lives we touch. We make him known through the lives we transform. We make him known through the lives we bless. Not just by what we preach, but by what we do for them. So outreaches are central. I'm big on outreaches. Every year we do a lot of things. Whether it's in India, where we take care of HIV patients, where we take care of widows, where we take care of the blind, where we take care of the leprous, or maybe in Africa, where we take care of those that have been internally displaced by war, or maybe it is children that are orphans that we are sending to school. But there are a lot of things that we do, and we believe that it is part of the holistic nature of the gospel that the Lord has called us to preach. I think one of the ways through which believers support mission beyond giving is through intercession. It's through intercession. You may not be able to give, but your prayers can go. Your skill can go. Your intercession can go. And I believe that every church, every ministry should be involved in missions beyond giving by dedicating time to pray for the end time harvest. By dedicating time to pray for those who are already in the mission field. You may not have anything to give, but your prayers are valuable in the eyes of God. Your prayers are valuable in the sight of God. You see, when Paul writes to the Corinthians, he makes a very interesting statement. He says that there is a group that the God of this world has blinded, such that this group has become insensitive to our gospel. He said, pray. He said, if our gospel is hid, it is hid to those whose eyes are blinded by the God of this world. On another occasion, he says, a great and effectual door has been opened. He said, but there are many adversaries. He invited them to pray for him. On another occasion, you hear him make statements like this. Pray that God will give me utterance, that I may proclaim the gospel boldly. So beyond your giving, one of the greatest things you can do as a contribution to missions is to pray. And this statement was made by a man who did not only request prayers, but who also encouraged the churches to support missions. In his writing to the Corinthians, to the church in Philippi, to the Colossians, to the Corinthians, you hear him say, like, let that which was collected for the support be prepared, such that when I send one of my assistants, that support will be ready. But on other occasions, he will tell them to pray. I believe that you and I are called beyond our giving to be intentional about praying for the mission field, that those who are there, the Lord may give them an abundant harvest and even the harvest of souls.